In the vast emptiness between stars where silence reigns eternal and darkness swallows light, predators have always existed. They hunt, they consume, they move on. For 10,000 years the Raktis had perfected this cycle across 100 worlds, leaving nothing but bones and ash in their wake. Apex hunters from the molten depths of Infernus Prime, they were evolution's cruelest joke, intelligent enough to savor fear, strong enough to crack steel with bare claws, and patient enough to watch civilizations crumble before they fail. But patience can be a predator's greatest weakness, especially when the prey learns to bite back. The warning came 17 minutes too late. Admiral Jackson Cross stood before the tactical display in Outpost Meridian's command center, watching red dots multiply across the holographic representation of humanity's newest colony world. Each dot represented death. Each pulse meant another settlement had gone dark. Peraxis 7 was supposed to be humanity's triumph, a volcanic hell world that no sane species would dare inhabit, transformed into a fortress through sheer human stubbornness and engineering brilliance. The planet's surface was a maze of lava flows, sulfurous geysers, and temperatures that would melt most alien physiology in minutes. Perfect for a species that had evolved in Africa's furnace and conquered every hostile environment their homeworld could throw at them. "Sir," Communications Officer Rivera's voice carried the tremor of someone trying not to break, "we've lost contact with Mining Station Zulu 7. That's 14 facilities in 6 hours." Cross's jaw tightened. At 62, he'd survived the Centauri Wars, the Proxima Rebellion, and 3 separate attempts by the Galactic Council to relocate humanity to more suitable worlds. His weathered face bore scars from conflicts across a dozen star systems, but his gray eyes remained sharp as tungsten blades. "Pattern analysis? Working outward from the northern continent, sir. Whatever's hitting us moves fast and leaves no survivors. No distress signals, no defensive fire recorded. Just..." Rivera swallowed hard. Silence. Through the reinforced windows of the command center, Kors could see Peraxis 7's perpetual twilight. Twin suns cast everything in shades of orange and red, while rivers of molten rock painted glowing arteries across the landscape. In the distance, Mount Prometheus, the colony's central volcano, belched sulfur clouds into the crimson sky. Beautiful in its way, deadly, certainly, but home. "Sir." Sensor Technician Park's voice cracked like a whip. "Contact bearing 27 Mark 15. Big one. Really big." The holographic display shifted, zooming in on a massive heat signature descending through Peraxis 7's turbulent atmosphere. The craft was enormous, easily 3 times the size of humanity's largest dreadnought, and its bioorganic curves suggested living tissue rather than manufactured hull plating. "Dear God," Rivera whispered. Cross said nothing. He'd seen ships like this before, in classified intelligence briefings that made hardened Marines wake up screaming. The Rakthos. Ghost stories whispered in starport bars across human space. Apex predators that hunted not for survival but for sport, for the thrill of watching terror bloom in their prey's eyes before the killing blow. Humanity had been lucky, hidden in their corner of the galaxy, building strength while older civilizations fell to these monsters. But luck, Cross knew, always ran out eventually. "All stations, battle alert Crimson," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of command across every military frequency on the planet. "Deploy defensive positions, evacuate civilian sectors to hardened shelters, and get me a direct line to Earth Command." "Sir, quantum communication array is showing massive interference. We can't." "Then we're on our own." Kors turned to face the massive tactical screen, watching that bioship's heat signature grow larger as it descended toward the planet's surface. Just like always, 300 kilometers above Peraxis 7's roiling atmosphere, Hunting Master Veltar Quaneth flexed his primary combat talons and tasted anticipation in the recycled air of the bioship's command chamber. The prey world spread below him like a canvas painted in fire and stone. Rivers of molten rock carved glowing channels across continents wreathed in sulfurous clouds. Volcanic peaks thrust upward like the fangs of some primordial beast, belching ash and flame into the toxic sky. Perfect hunting ground. The kind of environment that would separate the truly worthy prey from the merely adequate. Quanath stood nearly 3 meters tall when fully upright. His chitinous exoskeleton, the color of dried blood, shot through with veins of bioluminescent gold. 4 arms ending in razor-sharp talons. A elongated skull housing a brain evolved for tactical analysis, and sensory organs capable of detecting fear pheromones across vast distances. He was everything 10 million years of predatory evolution could create. And he was bored. "Status report," he commanded, his voice a harmonic blend of clicks, growls, and subsonic frequencies that made the bio-ship's living walls shiver in response. Sub-Hunter Yixtol Morden, smaller, younger, hungry for the kill glory that would elevate her standing in the pack, approached with the eager gait of untested youth. "Thermal imaging confirms multiple colony sites, Master. Population appears concentrated in hardened structures designed to withstand this world's hostile environment." "Tool users," Quinath mused, studying the tactical displays that pulsed along the chamber's organic walls. "Interesting. Most species avoid death worlds like this. These humans chose to live here. The pre-hunt intelligence suggests they're unusually adaptable." Arda reported, her secondary eyes already dilating with hunting fever. "They've colonized over 40 worlds, including several that should have killed them within hours." Quinath's primary combat talons extended another few centimeters. Adaptable prey was the finest kind. Intelligent enough to provide genuine sport, stubborn enough to make the hunt challenging. Baractus had grown fat and complacent, feeding on civilizations that submitted without meaningful resistance. These humans might actually prove entertaining. "Deployment pattern?" he asked. "Standard terror hunt protocol, Master. Strike the outlying settlements first. Drive survivors toward the central hive clusters. Let fear season the meat before we feed." "No." Kunt's decision surprised even himself. "These are Deathworlders. Terror may not work as expected. Deploy hunting packs to the central settlements immediately. Hit them where they feel strongest." Morden's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Master, that contradict. Have you ever hunted Deathworlders before, Sub-Hunter?" "No, Master." "Then you will observe and learn," signaled the pack leaders. "We begin the hunt now." The first attack came at 0347 local time, just as Paraxis 7's twin suns began painting the eastern horizon in shades of amber and gold. Private First Class Dmitry Volkov was pulling guard duty on the northern perimeter of Settlement Alpha Prime when the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. At first, he assumed it was another seismic event. Paraxis 7 was geologically active, and minor earthquakes were as common as sulfur rain. Then the screaming started. Volkov raised his plasma rifle and activated his helmet's enhanced optics, scanning the rocky landscape beyond the settlement's defensive walls. Heat shimmer rising from lava pools played tricks on the sensors, but their movement in the shadow of a basalt outcropping. Something big, something that moved wrong, like a nightmare spider crossed with a praying mantis and scaled up to the size of a main battle tank. "Command, this is Northern Guard Post 7, he whispered into his comm unit, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've got movement on the perimeter. Recommend immediate." The Raktis hunter exploded from concealment with impossible speed, covering 200 meters in less than 3 seconds. Volkov had time to fire exactly one shot, which splashed harmlessly off chitinous armor plates, before razor-sharp talons punched through his chest armor like tissue paper. But Dmitry Volkov was from Siberia originally, and his grandmother had told him stories about the old country, about wolves in winter, about fighting when fighting was all you had left. As alien claws pierced his lungs, Volkov triggered the emergency beacon on his combat vest and activated his plasma rifle's overload sequence. The weapon's power cell went critical just as the Raktis lifted him off the ground, detonating in a brief sun that turned night into day for a half-kilometer radius. The explosion vaporized Volkov instantly. It also took the hunter's primary arm and most of its sensory cluster, sending the creature stumbling backward with a shriek of pain and fury that shattered windows in the nearby residential complex. First blood to humanity. But it was only the beginning. Perimeter breach? All squads to combat stations. Sergeant First Class Maya Rodriguez had been dreaming of Earth's rainforests when the alarms jolted her awake. Now she was sprinting through Settlement Alpha Prime's main corridor, her combat gear half secured and her pulse rifle in her hands, while emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red. Behind her, 23 members of 2nd Platoon Paraxis Colonial Defense Force followed with the grim determination of soldiers who'd trained for this moment but never quite believed it would come. "Sit rep," she barked into her comm as they reached the main defensive position. "Unknown hostiles in the northern sector," came Lieutenant Hayes's voice, crackling with static and barely controlled terror. "We've lost guard post 7 completely. Thermal imaging shows at least 8 large contacts moving toward the residential areas." Rodriguez dropped behind a fortified position overlooking the settlement's main plaza and peered through her rifle's scope. In the distance, she could see shapes moving through the sulphurous haze, things that walked on too many legs and cast shadows that belonged in nightmares. "Rules of engagement?" asked Corporal Tran, a slight woman whose steady hands and deadly accuracy had earned her 3 commendations for marksmanship. "Kill everything that isn't human," Rodriguez replied. "And if you're not sure, kill it anyway." The first Rakthis hunter rounded the corner of the residential complex like a living earthquake, its chitinous bulk moving with predatory grace despite its size. Multiple eyes, each larger than a human fist, swiveled independently to track potential threats while its talons gouged deep furrows in the reinforced concrete. Rodriguez had fought pirates in the asteroid belt, separatists on Mars, and corporate security forces across half a dozen worlds. But this was different. This was looking at something that evolution had designed specifically to hunt her species. "Light them up," she screamed. 24 plasma rifles opened fire simultaneously, turning the settlement's main plaza into a cauldron of superheated gas and molten metal. The lead hunter staggered under the concentrated firepower, its armor plates glowing cherry red where the plasma bolts struck, but it kept coming. Switch to explosive rounds. Rodriguez ejected her rifle's plasma cell and slammed in a magazine of high-explosive ammunition. Around her, the platoon followed suit with the mechanical precision of endless training. The hunter was 30 meters away when the grenade started detonating against its carapace, 20 meters when it began to bleed luminescent fluid from cracks in its armor, 10 meters when Rodriguez realized it was going to reach their position, 5 meters when Private Jackson, barely 18, farm boy from New Montana, stood up from cover with a plasma caster designed for mining operations and fired it directly into the creature's primary sensory cluster. The hunter's head vanished in a flash of superheated vapor. Its body took 3 more steps before crashing into the defensive barricade hard enough to crack the reinforced concrete. But there were 7 more hunters out there, and the night was just beginning. In the bioship's command chamber, Hunting Master Quaneth watched the tactical displays with growing irritation. The first wave of hunters should have swept through the human colony like fire through dry grass. Instead, 3 of his pack leaders were already showing damage markers, and sub-hunter Yuktal Morden had gone completely dark after her assault on the northern perimeter. "Status of pack leader Morden," he commanded. "Biometric feedback indicates critical injury." "Master," reported navigation symbiont Keshmore, whose neural interface with the bioship's sensory organs made him the most accurate source of battlefield intelligence. "Thermal signature suggests explosive decompression of primary biomass. Dead, in other words. The first Raksis to fall to human weapons in over a century of hunting." Quaneth's secondary arms twitched with barely contained fury. The prey was fighting back with unexpected coordination and lethality. Their weapons, while primitive by galactic standards, were remarkably effective against Rakthis bio-armor when used in concentrated volleys. More troubling, they showed no signs of the paralyzing terror that typically preceded feeding. Instead, they seemed to be adapting their tactics in real time, learning from each encounter and passing that knowledge to other hunting parties across their colony network. "Master," Keshmore's voice carried an unusual note of uncertainty. "The prey is exhibiting behavior patterns inconsistent with previously catalogued species." "Explain." "They're not fleeing. Standard terror hunt protocols assume prey will scatter when faced with superior predators, allowing us to isolate individuals for feeding. These humans are consolidating, drawing together into defensive formations and fighting as coordinated groups." On the tactical display, Quaneth could see exactly what the navigation symbiont meant. Instead of panic and exodus, the human settlements were showing signs of organized military resistance. Supply lines were being established between defensive positions. Casualties were being evacuated to protected medical facilities. Combat units were repositioning to create overlapping fields of fire. They were behaving like predators defending territory, not prey fleeing slaughter. Interesting, Quaneth mused, extending his primary combat talons to their full length. Very interesting indeed. Signal all pack leaders, abandon terror hunt protocols, deploy for direct assault, and prepare the brood ship for planetary insertion. Master, the brood ship hasn't been deployed in 300 years, yes. Perhaps it's time the prey remembered why we are apex hunters. But even as he gave the orders, something cold settled in Quaneth's primary stomach. For the first time in his long hunting career, he was beginning to suspect that the prey might not be as helpless as they appeared. Dawn broke over settlement Alpha Prime like a fever dream, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold while Mount Prometheus belched sulfur clouds into the turbulent atmosphere. The settlement's defenders had held through the night, but at a cost that would be measured in blood and grief for years to come. Admiral Cross picked his way through the aftermath, his boots crunching on debris from shattered barricades and puddles of luminescent alien blood that steamed in the morning heat. 14 dead, 7 wounded, and one entire residential complex reduced to rubble, but they'd killed 7 of the hunters. 7 apex predators that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, brought down by human stubbornness and superior firepower. Sir, Sergeant Rodriguez approached, her armor scorched and her left arm in a field medical sling. Casualty reports from the other settlements are coming in. Cross accepted the datapad with steady hands, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Settlement Beta 7, 6 dead, 12 wounded, 3 hunters killed. Settlement Gamma Delta, 11 dead, 23 wounded, 5 hunters killed. The pattern held across all 17 attacked sites. Heavy human casualties, but the aliens were dying too. They're not invincible, he said aloud, as much to convince himself as inform his subordinates. No, sir, Rodriguez agreed. But there are a lot more of them up there. As if summoned by her words, the sky began to darken. Not the natural progression of Paraxis 7's day-night cycle, but something else, something vast, blotting out the twin suns like a mechanical eclipse. Cross raised his binoculars and felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. The new ship descending from orbit made the first bio-vessel look like a fighter craft. It was easily 10 kilometers long, its organic hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that suggested a Maloan intelligence. Weapon ports along its sides opened like hungry mouths, revealing energy projectors that could crack continental plates. Dear God in heaven, Communications Officer Rivera whispered over the comm channel. Sir, that thing could glass the entire planet. But Cross was no longer listening to his subordinates. His attention was fixed on the massive ship's approach vector, and the terrible realization of what it meant. The aliens weren't trying to conquer Paraxis 7. They were trying to preserve it. A hunting preserve, where humanity would play the role of prey for the rest of their species' existence. Smart enough to provide sport, isolated enough that no rescue would come, and trapped on a death world that would prevent any escape. All stations, he said quietly into his comm unit, his voice carrying across every military and civilian frequency on the planet, prepare for siege protocols. We're not just fighting for our lives anymore, we're fighting for our freedom. The brood ship settled into orbit above settlement Alpha Prime like a predator claiming its territory. Its bioluminescent patterns pulsed once, twice, 3 times. And then the real hunt began. There is an ancient human saying, when you find yourself in hell, keep walking. The Rakthus had never encountered a species that took such proverbs literally. For 6 months, the siege of Paraxis 7 ground on like a malignant tumor, consuming lives and hope in equal measure. The great brood ship hung in orbit like a mechanical moon, disgorging wave after wave of hunters while humanity's colonists fought from an ever-shrinking perimeter of fortified settlements. But survival, as humans had learned across 10,000 years of evolution, was not simply about lasting another day. It was about adaptation, about learning, about turning weakness into strength and predator into prey, about remembering that apex hunters could still bleed. And they bled so beautifully. Dr. Elizabeth Kane crouched in the ruins of Research Station Omicron, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system as she made the final adjustments to the monitoring equipment. Around her, the twisted wreckage of humanity's most advanced xenobiology lab told the story of the past 6 months. A tale written in plasma burns, shattered concrete, and the dried luminescent blood of creatures that had learned too late not to underestimate their prey. At 43, Kane had spent her career studying alien physiology across 17 different star systems. She'd dissected Centauran nerve clusters, analyzed Proxima's cellular structures, and written the definitive text on non-terrestrial biochemistry, but she'd never had the opportunity to study a live apex predator from the inside. Until now. Heart rate is stabilizing, she reported into her comm unit, watching the readouts from the medical sensors attached to her current patient. Neural activity shows patterns consistent with REM sleep in terrestrial mammals. I think the sedatives are finally taking hold. The patient in question was 3 meters of chitinous nightmare, restrained with industrial-grade magnetic clamps to a reinforced surgical table that had been originally designed for mining equipment maintenance. Sub-Hunter Yictal Morden, the same creature that had led the first assault on Settlement Alpha Prime, was now serving an entirely different role in humanity's survival strategy. She was providing intelligence. Dr. Kane, Admiral Cross's voice crackled through the comm system, tinged with the exhaustion that had become humanity's constant companion. Are you certain the restraints will hold? Kane glanced at the quantum-locked magnetic clamps that held the Rakthis immobilized. Each clamp could generate a gravitational field strong enough to compress carbon into diamond. They'd hold. Positive. Admiral, our guest isn't going anywhere. The capture had been a stroke of luck, born from desperation. Morden's hunting pack had been probing the northern defenses when a seismic event, one of Mount Prometheus's periodic volcanic eruptions, had triggered a landslide. The other hunters had escaped, but Morden had been trapped under several tons of basalt and lava rock. By the time the rescue teams had dug her out, she was unconscious from blood loss and neural shock, but alive, and that made her the most valuable resource on Paraxis 7. Beginning neural interface, Kane announced, positioning the quantum resonance scanner above the alien's elongated skull. If the theoretical models are correct, I should be able to access short-term memory engrams without permanent damage. The scanner hummed to life, its crystalline core generating fields that could read synaptic patterns across species barriers. Kane had developed the technology to study nonverbal communication in primitive alien cultures. She'd never imagined using it to extract military intelligence from a captured apex predator. Images began flowing across her display screens. Fragmented memories pulled from Morden's alien consciousness. The broodship's interior, vast and organic like the inside of some gigantic organism, feeding chambers where previous prey had been processed. And something else. Admiral, Kane's voice carried a note of excitement that had been absent from human communications for months. I'm reading memories of other hunting expeditions. Dozens of them. And in every case the same pattern: initial resistance followed by complete collapse within days. What does that tell us? Kane smiled for the first time in weeks. It tells us that we're the first species to last this long. Whatever we're doing differently, it's working. But as she delved deeper into Morden's memories, Kane found something that made her blood run cold. Images of vast breeding chambers aboard the broodship where captured prey were kept alive for reproductive purposes. Not just individuals, but entire genetic lineages preserved to serve as hunting stock for future generations. The Rakthis weren't just trying to conquer humanity. They were trying to domesticate them. Admiral, we need to talk. Immediately. Hunting Master Quanath paced the broodship's primary command chamber with the restless energy of a predator denied its kill. 6 months. 6 months. Of what should have been a routine hunting expedition, and the prey was still fighting, still adapting, still learning from each encounter and applying that knowledge to future defensive strategies. It was unprecedented. Status report, he commanded, his voice carrying the edge of barely controlled frustration. Pack leader, Rixnal Thaver, eldest of the surviving hunters scarred from dozens of successful expeditions, approached with the measured gait of experience tempered by hard-won respect for their current adversaries. 17 hunter casualties confirmed, Master. The prey has developed new weapons specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in our bioarmor. They're also using their world's volcanic activity to create tactical advantages. Kwaneth's primary combat talons extended reflexively. 17 hunters lost to primitive prey. The shame would follow him across a dozen worlds if the Brood Council ever learned of it. Elaboration on these weapons? High-temperature plasma channeled through volcanic vents. Master. They've turned their Deathworld's own hostile environment into a weapon system. Yesterday's assault on Settlement Gamma Delta resulted in the loss of 3 hunters when the prey triggered what appeared to be a controlled eruption. Impossible. Primitive tool users couldn't possibly have that level of geological knowledge. Could they? And our breeding stock? Favar's mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment among his species. Sabadana Morden remains in prey custody. Attempts at recovery have been unsuccessful. Koneth felt something cold coil in his primary stomach. Morden contained genetic memories of 17 successful hunting expeditions, including detailed tactical analysis of prey behavior patterns across multiple star systems. In the wrong hands or claws, that information could be devastating. Master. Navigation symbiont Keshmore interrupted from his bio-neural interface pod. I'm detecting unusual energy patterns from the primary settlement. Quantum resonance signatures consistent with neural scanning equipment. The ice in Kwaneth's stomach spread to his extremities. The prey was accessing Morden's memories, learning not just about current tactics but about the entire history of Raktis hunting methodology. Signal all pack leaders, he commanded, his voice carrying the harmonic frequencies of absolute authority. Prepare for final assault. No more games. No more sport. Extermination protocols only. Master? The Brood Council specifically ordered. The Brood Council is not here, Koneth snarled, his secondary arms flexing with barely contained violence. I am. And I will not allow prey to make mockeries of apex hunters. But even as he gave the orders, Koneth couldn't shake the growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted in the balance between predator and prey. The humans had lasted too long, adapted too quickly, learned too much. They were becoming dangerous. The attack came at dawn on the 193rd day of the siege, preceded by a seismic bombardment from the brood ship's orbital weapons that cracked the foundations of every structure in Settlement Alpha Prime. Admiral Cross watched the tactical displays from the command bunker's reinforced operations center, his weathered hands steady on the communication controls despite the ground-shaking impacts above. Dust rained from the ceiling with each blast, and the emergency lighting flickered with power fluctuations. But the bunker held, human engineering at its finest, designed to withstand anything up to and including direct nuclear bombardment. The Raktis energy weapons were powerful, but they couldn't crack 50 meters of reinforced concrete and quantum-hardened steel. Seismic bombardment is shifting to kinetic rounds, reported Sensor Technician Park, his voice carrying the calm professionalism that came from 6 months of constant combat. Incoming hunter pods. Multiple vectors. Count is, dear God, sir. Over 200 contacts. 200 hunters, more than had been deployed in all previous attacks combined. This was their final gambit, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision to end the siege once and for all. Cross opened the general communication channel to address every human being left alive on Paraxis 7, 4,312 souls, according to the latest census. Men and women who had chosen to make their stand on a volcanic hell world rather than surrender to extinction. This is Admiral Cross to all personnel, he said, his voice carrying across every comm frequency on the planet. The enemy is committing everything to this assault. They want to end this today. Well, so do I. He paused, looking around at the faces of the men and women who had followed him through 6 months of the impossible soldiers. Scientists, miners, engineers and civilians who had learned to fight because the alternative was death. 6 months ago, these things thought we were just another prey species to be hunted for sport. They were wrong. We're survivors. We're fighters. And today we're going to teach them the difference between predator and prey. The command bunker erupted in cheers that could be heard through 50 meters of rock and steel. Above them, the real battle was about to begin. Sergeant Rodriguez crouched behind the twisted wreckage of a plasma artillery emplacement, watching her remaining squad members check their weapons with the methodical precision of veterans. 12 soldiers left from the original platoon of 36, their armor patched and repatched, their faces bearing the 1,000-yard stare of people who had seen too much and lived too long. But they were alive, and that meant something. "Contact, northwest quadrant," reported Corporal Tran, her sniper rifle tracking movement through the sulphurous haze. "Multiple targets. Moving fast. Really fast." Rodriguez raised her plasma rifle and peered through its targeting scope. In the distance she could see shapes flowing across the rocky landscape like living water, dozens of Rakthis hunters moving in perfect coordination toward the settlement's defensive perimeter. But something was different about this assault. The hunters weren't spreading out to create multiple threat vectors. They were concentrating their attack on a single point in the defensive line, massing their force for a breakthrough assault that would split the human defenses in half. "All squads, this is Sergeant Rodriguez," she announced over the tactical frequency. "Enemy is attempting concentrated breakthrough at grid reference 77 Alpha. Recommend immediate reinforcement and artillery support." "Negative, Sergeant," came Admiral Cross's voice over the comm. "All other sectors are reporting simultaneous assault. No reinforcements available." Rodriguez felt something cold settle in her stomach. They were spread too thin, their forces divided across too many defensive positions. The aliens had finally learned the lesson that humans had been trying to teach them for 6 months. Sometimes the best defense was a good offense. "Squad leaders, prepare for controlled withdrawal to secondary positions," she ordered. "Fighting retreat, by the numbers. Make them pay for every meter." But as the first wave of hunters crested the ridgeline, Rodriguez realized that withdrawal might not be an option. There were too many of them, moving too fast with too much coordination. For the first time in 6 months she began to wonder if this was how humanity's stand on Paraxis 7 would end. Then Private Jackson, the farm boy from New Montana who had killed his first hunter with a mining laser, stood up from cover with something Rodriguez had never seen before. It looked like a rifle, but where the barrel should have been, there was instead a crystalline focusing array that pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns as Rakdonar. And when Jackson pulled the trigger, the beam that emerged was not plasma or coherent light. It was pure, concentrated volcanic energy channeled through alien biotechnology and focused into a weapon that could melt through chitinous armor like butter. The lead hunter simply evaporated. "Where the hell did you get that?" Rodriguez shouted over the sound of superheated air expanding. Jackson grinned, the first genuine smile she'd seen from anyone in months. Dr. Kane reverse-engineered it from the prisoner's bio-armor. Turns out their own technology works real well against them. Around the defensive perimeter, other soldiers were emerging from cover with similar weapons. Hybrid devices that combined human engineering with captured alien technology. Weapons specifically designed to exploit every weakness that 6 months of bloody experience had revealed in Rakthis physiology. The hunters had taught humanity how to kill them. Now it was time for the final exam. In the broodship's command chamber, Hunting Master Koneth watched his carefully planned assault dissolve into chaos with the horrified fascination of a predator suddenly realizing it had become prey. The tactical displays showed hunter after hunter going dark as the humans deployed weapons that should not exist. Energy signatures that matched Rakthis biotechnology, but wielded with human tactical doctrine. It was impossible. It was happening anyway. "Master," Pack Leader Thulver's voice carried over the communication link distorted by pain and shock. "The prey has developed weapons using our own technology. My pack is taking severe casualties. Request immediate." The transmission cut to static as Thulver's bio-signature vanished from the tactical display. "Navigation symbiont," Koneth commanded. "Analysis of enemy weapons systems." Keshimore's response came slowly, as if the bio-neural interface was struggling to process the impossible data streams. Energy patterns consistent with Rakthis plasma channeling biotechnology. "Master, but the focusing arrays appear to be enhanced, optimized beyond standard specifications." "That's impossible. Prey species lacked the neural complexity to understand Rakthis technology." "Nevertheless, Master, the evidence suggests otherwise. The humans appear to have not only reverse-engineered our biotechnology but improved upon it." Koneth felt his world shift on its axis. For 10,000 years, the Raktis had been apex hunters because their biotechnology was superior to anything their prey could develop. They hunted with living weapons, fought in living ships, and used the captured technology of their victims to improve their own capabilities. But what happened when the prey learned to do the same thing? What happened when they did it better? Master Keshimor's voice carried a note of urgency that bordered on panic. I'm detecting energy signatures from the planetary surface consistent with broodship-class weapons. Impossible. The humans have no... The command chamber's bioluminescent walls suddenly flared with warning patterns as something struck the broodship's hull with the force of a small asteroid. Emergency biosystems activated throughout the vessel, sealing hull breaches and rerouting power around damaged sectors. Report, Kuneth commanded. Energy lance from the planetary surface master. Focused plasma beam with yield equivalent to our own primary weapons. Source appears to be Mount Prometheus, the volcano. The humans had somehow turned their world's own volcanic fury into a weapon capable of threatening a broodship in orbit. Kuneth stared at the tactical displays with the growing realization that he had made a fundamental error in judgment. He had assumed the humans were prey because they appeared primitive. But appearances, as any successful hunter knew, could be deceiving. The humans weren't prey at all. They were apex predators who had been pretending to be prey until they learned everything they needed to know about their hunters. Signal retreat, he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Master? Signal retreat, Quineth roared, his harmonic voice frequencies cracking the command chamber's biocrystal formations. Get us out of orbit. Get us away from this world. Now. But as the broodship began its ponderous turn away from Paraxis 7, Kuneth couldn't shake the terrible certainty that it was already too late. The prey had become predators, and they were hungry. In the space between heartbeats, between the drawing of breath and the letting go, there exists a moment of perfect clarity where predator and prey recognize each other for what they truly are. For the Raktis, that moment came when they realized they were no longer the hunters. For humanity, it came when they understood that survival was not enough. Justice demanded more. Justice demanded harvest. And on a world where lava flows like water, and the very air burns with sulfur and rage, humanity was about to teach the galaxy a lesson about apex predators that would echo across the stars for 1,000 generations. Some species hunt for survival. Others hunt for sport. Humans hunt for justice. And they are very, very good at it. 1 year later, the broodship Velthak Morgethul drifted through the void between Paraxis 7's twin suns like a dying leviathan, its bioluminescent hull patterns flickering with the irregular pulse of a failing heart. What had once been the terror of a dozen star systems now served a very different purpose. A breeding facility where humanity's newest industry could flourish. Administrator Jackson Cross, promoted from admiral following the Battle of Mount Prometheus, walked through the converted bioship's corridors with the measured pace of a man who had learned to appreciate irony. The walls around him pulsed with the same organic rhythms they always had, but the neural patterns flowing through the living metal now responded to human biosignatures rather than Rakthis pheromone commands. Production report, he requested from his aide. A former communications officer named Rivera, who had traded her military uniform for the practical coveralls of a xenobiological engineer. Harvest Bay 7 completed processing yesterday's batch, she reported, consulting her digital tablet with the efficiency that had kept humanity alive during the siege. 237 viable specimens, all showing optimal growth patterns. Lakasturi, and estimates will be ready for the first commercial shipments within 60 days. Cross nodded, pausing at one of the observation windows that looked down into the ship's primary holding areas. Below them, in climate-controlled chambers that had once been reserved for captured prey, hundreds of Raktis specimens moved with the restless energy of predators in captivity. But these weren't captured wild hunters. These were something else entirely. The result of 18 months of intensive genetic engineering, selective breeding and behavioral modification. Smaller than their wild counterparts, more docile and infinitely more valuable. The galaxy's most sought-after luxury protein. Any word from the agricultural stations? Cross asked. Settlement Zeta Prime reports record yields from their thermal vent farms, Rivera replied. Turns out Ractus biomass makes excellent fertilizer for volcanic soil agriculture, and the mining operations are ahead of schedule. Apparently, their chitinous waste products have unique metallurgical properties that make them ideal for high-temperature industrial applications. Cross smiled. 18 months ago, the Ractus had come to Piraxis 7 expecting to establish a hunting preserve where humanity would serve as livestock for their entertainment. Now the roles were reversed, and humanity was discovering that their former tormentors had surprisingly practical applications. Food, fertilizer, industrial materials, and for the wild specimens still fighting guerrilla actions in the planet's deeper volcanic regions, sport hunting opportunities for wealthy tourists from across human space. What about the breeding programs? Dr. Kane has successfully developed 3 distinct genetic lines, Rivera reported. The standard variety for general protein production, the deluxe line for premium culinary applications, and the industrial breed specifically optimized for chitinous waste output. They passed another observation window, this one looking down into what had once been the broodship's primary command chamber. The space had been converted into a research facility where human scientists worked alongside captured Ractus biotechnology to develop new applications for their former enemy's genetic material. Dr. Elizabeth Kane looked up from a bioanalytical workstation and waved, her lab coat stained with the luminescent fluids that passed for blood in Ractus physiology. At her side, submitter Eucantel Morden, now designated Specimen Alpha 7, stood motionless in a bioneural interface harness that allowed her memories to be accessed without permanent damage. "How's our star witness adjusting to retirement?" Cross asked. "Better than expected," Rivera replied. Dr. Kane says the neural interface has actually improved Morden's cognitive function. Apparently, constant memory extraction has forced her brain to develop new pathways for information processing. Cross studied the captured Ractus through the observation window. Morden had been the first hunter to assault Settlement Alpha Prime, the creature that had killed 18 humans in the opening hours of the siege. Now she was humanity's most valuable research asset, providing intelligence that had allowed them to track down and capture the remainder of her species. Justice, Cross reflected, was sometimes indistinguishable from irony. "Sir," Rivera's voice carried a note of excitement. "Priority communication from Earth's Central Command. They want to discuss expansion of the Piraxis 7 agricultural project to other systems." "Other systems?" "Apparently there's significant interest in establishing similar facilities wherever large populations of wild Ractus can be located. The profit margins are substantial." Cross considered this. Humanity had spent centuries being pushed around by more advanced species, relegated to marginal worlds and told to be grateful for the scraps of galactic civilization. Now they controlled the only known source of Ractus biomass, a commodity that was rapidly becoming the galaxy's most valuable luxury resource. "Set up a meeting with the Colonial Development Authority," he ordered. "It's time to discuss expansion." As they continued through the converted broodship, Cross reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought humanity to this point. 18 months ago, they had been prey. Now they were ranchers, farmers, and entrepreneurs in the galaxy's newest growth industry. And the Ractus were just another form of livestock. Deep in the volcanic caverns beneath Mount Prometheus, Hunting Master Quaneth crouched in the sulphurous darkness and contemplated the ruin of everything he had once believed about the natural order of predator and prey. Around him, the last free members of his hunting expedition, 7 survivors from an original force of 300, maintained the kind of perfect stillness that only apex predators could achieve. But they were no longer hunting. They were hiding. "Status report," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant rumble.